Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to get rocking and rolling here. You've got Gabe Larson. I'm somewhat of your usual suspect, so I hope that's okay. I feel like some of you I'm noticing who are joining. I'm starting to see familiar names and faces, so I'll be offended if you guys don't add me on LinkedIn. I want to continue the conversation. We want to make this beneficial for you so that we answer your questions and see if we can't help you not just use the InsideSales.com technology better, but obviously optimize your remote or inside sales team. So today we're going to be talking about best practice sales development reporting, but I do want to know who we've got in here. Looks like we've got a handful of people. Good. Jump on your Q&A if you can, and tell me your name and where you're coming from, just so I can kind of see who we've got. And I know you've got I know you got your Q&A working well there. Looks like we got Karen, Michael, Jamie, Thomas, Betty. Perfect, you guys. Great. All right, let's jump in. Again, use that Q&A box as much as you can, and I will try to answer those questions. Yeah, Bobby, appreciate you joining. Jane, thanks so much for joining. I'm expecting good questions from you guys today as we talk about best practice sales development reporting. Now, again, guys, the sales development reporting is kind of what the topic is, but prospect reporting in general is, I think we're going to be hit. So this week we're going to hit the kind of the structure and some of the best practices. Next week we actually want to get in and start building those for you so that you can see it, taste it, and feel it. Mike, thanks for joining. Jane, thanks for joining. Good. Okay, let's go. So number 2 here. Here's a little bit of the agenda. We're going to hit a brief overview on sales dev, what it is. Then I want to hit principles of reporting for sales development. And then we want to touch on best practice for sales development. We'll go into a couple questions and bring it to an end here. So what is sales development? My goodness, there's so many questions out there, or a lot of definitions as to what is or is what is not sales development. We've put our own definition out there, and it's going to relate as we talk about reporting. Sales development, they are the pipeline team. Its primary goal is to partner with the sales team to close business by providing qualified pipeline. Look, sales development is not about activities. It's not about appointments. It's not about phone calls. The end-all, be-all is pipeline, and everything should be leading up to that. So when you look at a sales process, I've got prospects and leads and qualified leads, opportunities and customers. As I think about pipeline, it's really those first 4 boxes where prospecting or sales development really gets their hands dirty through that entire finding or getting prospects, working the leads, qualifying those leads, and even creating and potentially helping convert those opportunities further down the pipeline. Now, one of the big things that's going to come up in today's conversation is the different types of prospecting motions that you may have. So stick with me for a minute. A lot of people say, hey, Gabe, I've got a sales development team. Oh, great. That's great. The truth is, I need to know what type of sales development team you have, because the reporting and the best practices and the cadences, it all is different depending on what type of sales development team you have. So again, stick with me for just a second here. I usually ask 2 questions. I say, do you have a sales development team? Or an account executive team. Okay, you have a sales development team. Great. Now, are you transactional or relational? Is that sales development team, are they focus on smaller deals and shorter sales cycles? Or are they on bigger deals and longer sales cycles? That's transactional versus relational. Okay, great. Let's say they're transactional. Fantastic. Are they then inbound or outbound? Are they focusing on following up on inbound generated demand? Or are they focusing on going outbound cold to prospects? With those 3 questions, sales development or account executives, transactional versus relational, and inbound and outbound, I could tell you the optimal process, comp, cadence, reporting structure. It aligns very well with those. So I want to ask the group here, what type of sales development teams you have. Are you transactional or relational? Are you inbound or outbound? And go ahead and put it in that Q&A box, as I kind of want to see what groups we have here. Good. Got a couple people coming in. Bobby, we got relational outbound. Looks like we got Tim saying Transactional outbound. We got Mary saying relational. Jane saying both. Interesting. Yeah, and that's okay, you guys. You can absolutely have both transactional and relational. You can have inbound and outbound. Carlene, relational outbound, very little inbound. You sounded frustrated about that, Carlene, which most salespeople are. It's always better when marketing does the job of the prospector, but good. We got a handful more coming in, but it looks like we've got a decent mix, probably a little more of a relational approach. Thanks for the note, Carlene. But leaning more on the relational side of things, so we'll try to dovetail and focus a little bit on that. Good. Okay, let's hit these principles, guys, because before we get into some of the reports, let's talk about the principles of good reporting so that we're all on the same page. And here's kind of our six or so processes or principles. Number one, we need to understand the different types of reporting. We call them the 7 levels. Number two, we got to remember to fly like a pilot. I don't know who wrote these. These are a little bit cheesy. There's probably a little marketing there. Remember the race car driver. I've just been bashing marketing lately, haven't I? I got to be careful. Ask good questions, utilize leading indicators, and provide a prospecting pipeline. So these will be the principles, and then we'll dive into some of the reports, guys, in just a second. So first and foremost, the 7 levels. So here are the 7 levels of reporting. And I like this structure. I think it's an interesting way for me to have intelligent conversations with you about where most of your reports are on this spectrum. And again, you move from kind of the basics up to the more advanced. So let me take you through each of them just so you get the idea as to where those are. So number one is a metric. And some of you are like, Gabe, this is super basic. I'll go fast through this, so be patient. So again, a metric, those are just your basic numbers. For sales development, that would be something like number of phone calls, number of appointments, or number of opportunities. Next we move into the rate. Now, a rate is defined as metrics over time. So we take that concept and say number of phone calls per hour. We say number of activities per day or number of appointments per month. Next, and again, I'm going fast here. Cut me off if you got a question. Next is ratio. And the ratio metrics look at a rate over a rate. So those are going to be like my contact ratio. So that says my contacts per day over my dials per day. Those are 2 rates, and that gives me my contact ratio. I could go appointments held per week over appointments set per week. Oh, love that metric. One of the more underutilized sales development metrics, but often a large problem. That's your quote-unquote hold rate. Again, that falls in your quote-unquote bucket of ratio metrics. Disposition's probably the step that's missed the most, not just with sales development, across the board, is dispositional reporting. And these are always going to answer the questions of why. So, okay, I've got a lead status, and I've just marked this as, hey, this is a crappy lead, or this isn't a lead. Well, why isn't it? If you don't get to the why, you just never fix it. I just have this huge bucket of leads that are quote-unquote crappy. So getting dispositional reporting in can really help change the game. Why are they not ready? Well, they're working with our competition. It's a pricing scenario. If you're finding that all these leads are being disqualified because of pricing, well, you might need to change your pricing. But that type of feedback is only granted when you get into dispositional reporting. And again, probably the most underutilized. Looks like a couple of people here. Looks like Tom, Jamie, saying, yeah, dispositional reporting is they haven't heard of it. They've not utilized it. You're not alone on that, you guys. Very often we say that's probably a gap in reporting processes. The rest of these are probably self-explanatory. Trending, that's basically looking comparison over time. As we move forward, ROI reports is going to put a number to it. So we're going to look metrics over cost. So we'd say dials over cost, that's cost per dial, or opportunity over cost, cost per opportunity. That often is, again, probably not looked at. People don't go this far. They typically stick on the bottom 3 rungs, but it's very effective, especially when we think about like that cost per opportunity. I mean, how much is it really costing us to generate opportunities, and how does that fit into our overall ROI? And then last but not least, we get into some of this predictive, and this is just your forecasting concept. And we'll talk a little bit about some examples in sales development, but you basically want to see, am I trending towards goals? And if I can do that in an effective way, then I'm way, way, way ahead of the game. So those are the 7 levels. I know some of you are saying, I'm getting some mixed feedback on the Q&A, and guys, keep coming with the Q&A. I love it. Some of you are saying, hey, thanks, that's actually a really great structure. Some of you are saying that's a little bit boring. Not truthfully that harsh on saying boring, but some of you saying, I get it, let's go. So hopefully that's a structure that you can start to think about, well, what do we do with our reports? Do we have something in each level, or are we mostly focusing on the bottom 3, which is more typical than not? Okay, so that's the first principle. Remember the 7 levels. Now, the second is flying like a pilot. I don't know how many of you actually saw this movie. I believe it was called Sully. And Tom Hanks was the actor, and it was a story about, actually in the Q&A box if you can, how many of you saw the movie Sully? Am I right in that? I think it is the movie Sully. They call it The Miracle of Hudson. But basically what happened is you've got a senior airline pilot who's got that exact plane in the background, that size of plane, because his original plane was destroyed. Melissa, it sounds like a handful of you have seen the movie. Good. So you know the story, but this pilot takes his crew, takes all the passengers out of New York. What happens is immediately, right over the Hudson River, 2 birds take out his engines. And it's very interesting as you kind of watch the movie. I have not actually read the book, Kristen. That's an interesting point. But the birds take out the engines, and it's interesting to see his kind of line of thought. This Captain Sully, looks at a couple key gauges, has a couple key conversations. Can I land at LaGuardia? Can I land at JFK? He looks at this dial. He looks at that dial, and in very, not split seconds, but minimal time, he makes a decision that the only way to survive is to land on the Hudson. Now, they do a whole investigation to see if he was crazy, if he could have made it back, and lo and behold, under very little time and a lot of pressure, he was able to make the right decision. But the thing that I loved about it was this idea of focus. When it comes to reporting, I know we can report on anything. It's, wow, we can come up with all sorts of stuff. But the question is, what are those 5 to 7 metrics that are going to get you home safe? And oftentimes you want to start just with the basics. You want to say, how am I getting my stuff? How many leads am I getting, or how many prospects am I creating? What activities am I doing on those? How many conversations are coming from those activities? How many opportunities am I generating from those conversations? And then how many closed deals come from the opportunity? And then what's the overall revenue? Those are your basics. If you could tell me, if I could walk into any organization and they could just give me those 6 right there, that's so much further than all we wanted to see the average quota attainment by rep, by time, by location, by whoa. Hold on. Let's just start with the basics. And I think sometimes you got to find, what are the 5 to 7 key metrics that are going to get you home safely? Start there and then get more complicated. Remember the Captain Sully. Looks like most of you saw the movie and some of you saw the book or read the book. So next is asking great questions. Asking great questions. This is probably one of the secrets to success in reporting. The best questions make the best reports. Wanted to tell you just a brief story here where a great question was asked and we uncovered some real dirt. This was a company out in Philadelphia, and I will never forget this. I went out and did kind of this audit, this assessment that we'll often do with clients. And we were looking at their pipeline, and I've put it here on the right-hand side. So basically, they were getting about 1,498 contacts a month. That's kind of what the overall sales development team was working. From that group, they were generating a large number of appointments. Look at that, 72% of their contacts were turning into appointments that were basically being created each month. Guys, that's absurd. That was fantastic. Then we tracked them. We had to actually dig these numbers up. They did not have these, so we had to dig them up. So then we see this 346 appointments held. You've got a 35% hold rate, between what's being set and what's being held. And I just remember scratching our head thinking, well, something seems awfully fishy. And I remember one of the leaders said, how much time is there between appointments being set and appointments being held? And we said, we just, I don't know. I mean, I can see these numbers, but I don't know the answer to that question. Well, lo and behold, some of you are already typing it in. In fact, I'd love to see, I've got 5 people already guessed. How long do you think, how many days between appointments being set by sales development and then appointments being held by account executive rep, how many days do you think it was? Yes, no, it's not 25. So John put in 25. No, that's a little long. I'll tell you, it's a little less than 25. Kristen went with 35. Laurie, thank you. More like 2 weeks. We got Dave going with 1 day. Bobby, 18 days. So I got to give it to Bobby. He was right on there. Right? The average was 17 days. 17 days, you guys. I mean, how are we? I mean, that just can't happen. I can't remember what I did yesterday, let alone to what I agreed to almost a month ago. That metric alone, changing that metric and bringing that down from an average of 17 days to an average of 3 days, made wondrous changes in their numbers. And it all started with, 1, getting some basic numbers just in front of us, but number 2, asking great questions. And so here's some of the questions that I've found. I could probably think of a list of about 35, but some of the more intriguing questions that I've heard probably over the last 60 days that I thought that is actually a good question. And if you guys have some great questions, I'd love to see them. You could pop them in the Q&A. I'll add them to my basic list here. But are my reps working quality contacts? That's a great one. And the answer is usually no. How many contacts does a rep need to be actively working to achieve quota? That was so interesting. I got asked by a sales leader probably just 10 days ago. It's a great question. We got to figure that out. That's a report with probably a little bit of a calculator. What cadences work best for our target accounts? Boy, if you've not asked that one, you should, because a lot of people think there is a one-stop shop for all your cadence needs. There's not. I'll tell you that right now. There's just not. And then why are appointments not holding? So that was kind of the case study we just talked about a minute ago, the company back in Philadelphia. I hope those guys aren't on, but if you are, I apologize. It was such a great case study. I just had to include it. Boom. How many? So Laurie says, how many calls per day is ideal and realistic? And Laurie, is this for sales development reps? So again, depending on if you're transactional or relational, those numbers are going to differ. And if you're inbound versus outbound, they're going to differ. Now, the average is typically for sales development reps is hovering around 52. That drops significantly for account executives. That's kind of the average. That's not best practice. So Laurie, either ping me on LinkedIn or get me, follow up and tell me, what is your sales development team? Again, transactional, relational, inbound, outbound, and I'd give you a little tighter answer there because, again, it's always going to depend on those 2 questions. Great. Love the questions. Keep them coming, guys. Utilize leading indicators is the next one. I just wanted to mention this because this is so often missed in sales in general, right? I mean, how many of you, and you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A, but how many of you have had a sales leader say, I don't care what people do as long as they hit their number? I brought out my rough tone there. I've heard that so many times it makes me sick. I love the football analogy that first downs lead to touchdowns. If you're serious about making improvement, if you're serious about moving forward, you can't just focus on touchdowns. So if I walk into organizations, and I see it a lot with sales development teams, well, we just track the pipeline that they do or just the number of opportunities they create. Well, I mean, is it a good number? Is it a bad number? How can we improve it? If you're not measuring leading indicators, you are definitely going to be in trouble. So here's some of the more common leading indicators that you may want to be considering. And these are a little bit more categories, but I love them and I want to go through them briefly. This more conversations and better conversations. Guys, when it comes to sales development, it is so pivotal. All the data I've ever crunched, and some of you may say this is pretty obvious, but the most predictive leading indicator of opportunities is my ability to have a conversation with the prospect. Wow, that may not sound like rocket science, and truthfully, It is not rocket science, but if you have conversations, you're going to have more opportunities. So if you're not tracking concepts around conversations, you're in a bad place. So I love the concept of more conversations, better conversations. And this is where the InsideSales.com product just kills it. And again, we'll be diving specifically into that next week and building some of these reports that we think are must-haves for prospectors. Now, more leads, better leads. Again, very important. Um, Sometimes people get mad when I say this, you guys, but honestly, it's all about the leads. We can talk about coaching and we can talk about how well you qualify and how many calls you make. And don't get me wrong, they're all important things. But if you have great leads and even decent salespeople, I promise you, you will make money. And so being able to get more leads or more relevant contacts that are qualified and likely to buy from you, it's just a game changer. It really does make a huge difference. So tracking and understanding that is a big deal. The last two are interesting ones. They really fall more into the category of relational outbound. So some of you who mentioned that, these are things you want to be considering. We're seeing these come on very fast. We call it mapping and profiling. Mapping and profiling is how well are you able to identify your target accounts and how well are you able to then figure out who your target contacts are as part of that account. You got to be able to map the organization, and then you got to be able to profile the actual contact. So we're seeing more and more organizations start to pay or do incentives or track how many contacts am I adding into CRM? How many have an updated profiling assessment or a rapport statement, or how much do we actually have some information about these contacts? And so I was just at an organization, they have to add 15 new contacts per day to their CRM. That's part of the relational outbound sales motion. So again, it's an important part of some leading indicators you may want to consider. Whew. Okay. I'm going to skip. Well, yeah, let's skip this one. Probably not that important at the moment. So let's go into this remember the race car driver principle. I know some of you are probably getting a little tired of principles. We'll get into some more of the meat here, I promise, in just a minute. But these are some of the fundamental principles that I've been to so many companies, and we're just missing the boat on these. So I want to make sure you at least get some of the concepts. So I've been to a total of one NASCAR race in my entire life. But I did find it interesting. You're actually seeing the cockpit of a race car here, and they've got 14 different items that they basically highlight. I'm not going to read all of them out to you, but I'm telling you, the race car driver who is actually on the track, not the guys in the pit, not the guys in the press box, the person in the driver's seat has all the information he or she needs to effectively win the race. And so I ask you, do your sales development reps have all that they need to be the CEO of their territory, to effectively win the race? And I promise you, most of you probably would answer that no. I've seen it too many times. We often build reports for management and CEOs and dashboards and blah, 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 blah. We forget the person who actually has to run the race, which is the sales development rep or the account executive. If you don't have sales development dashboards, I mean, my best practice says a sales development rep should log in every day and see their cockpit, their dashboard that says, where am I? Where have I been? Where am I going? It's key, especially if you're relational outbound. If you're transactional inbound, I'd be open to debate and discuss that a little bit more, but if you are a relational outbound sales development and you don't have a cockpit view that you log into first thing every day, you're flying blind and you're relying on someone in the pit or in the press box to run things, and it'll lead to a disaster. The guy in the car has got to drive the car. So don't forget about the front line. I think I hit that one enough. Here's a sample dashboard. Now, part of the frontline activity is this concept of gamification. It's a great way to have reps have visualization of where they are, know what they're doing, be able to see exactly what they can and can't do, keep them engaged, etc. A couple points on gamification that we have found interesting is gamification is going to be more effective, one, if it's rep driven. There's always a top-down approach that's going to be effective, but the more you can get reps to interact with each other, the more engagement you're going to have. And then number two, Interestingly enough, gamification is one of the sales acceleration tools that is often seen the least amount of ROI. And a lot of people say, well, why? What the heck's that about? Part of it is because of the darn TV. People just throw up a TV in some random corner of their office and expect it to, I don't know, like beam signals to people 50 feet away. It just doesn't happen. It's so important that if you have a TV, that you also have something inside, that I see often that is engaging with me on my screen, because it's that live interaction rather than just the TV I walk by that often drives the engagement. So, a couple little teasers on gamification that I thought might be passed on there. Okay, providing a prospecting pipeline. Now, this goes a little bit back to the cockpit idea, but I wanted to double click on it. As we think about this idea of providing a prospecting pipeline, everybody I've ever talked to, they know what a sales pipeline is. All account executives manage their opportunities through a very structured approach. They say, yeah, I do opportunity management. I watch my deal stages and we do forecasts, et cetera, et cetera. For some reason, we don't believe that in sales development. And again, if you're a transactional sales development rep, this becomes a little less important, or potentially even a lot less important. But if you're a strategic, you're a relational outbound sales development rep, and you don't have the terminology of prospecting pipeline in your back pocket, I just think you're looking at it the wrong way. So let me give you, and it's really based on your lead or your contact statuses. Just like in an opportunity, you're based on your opportunity stages. A strategic prospecting pipeline is based on solid leader contact statuses. Now, if you want to think strategically about your prospecting pipeline, you typically are going to want to be thinking about 4 key areas. And that is quality, quantity, velocity, and balance. And I'm going to just actually give you the definition so that you have each of those there. If I'm a strategic sales development rep, I want to know quantity. Is the total quantity of your prospecting pipeline reasonable to your quota? Do I have enough contacts in place to actually hit the number of opportunities or the pipeline that I'm expecting to generate? I ask a sales development rep, and I bet you get 0 out of 100 who knows the answer to that question. And if you're relational outbound, you should know the answer. Quality. What percentage of your pipeline has a scheduled next event? We'll call this a SNE, right? A lot of people have, especially in prospecting, this is a worse problem in prospecting than it is in sales. You'll have these leads that are just sitting in buckets and they're not doing anything. If it does not have a scheduled next event, or an activity has not been done to a lead or contact in the last 30 days, it is dead and needs to be moved out so that I can actually manage and review and amplify my pipeline. Now, velocity and balance are probably my 2 favorites. Velocity, are you moving stuff through? As you think about those leader contact statuses, how well are you taking people from new to contacted, to appointment set, to opportunity created? You need to watch that, because a lot of reps, you'll see this happen, right? They'll say, I got a lot in the front, but I don't have a lot in the back. And that goes into the next one of balance. Is there an even distribution of prospects in each stage? I do a bunch of farming, right? So I get 100 contacts that I add into my CRM. I work those through, disqualify them or close them. Take a deep breath, and then go back and try to fill up my pipeline again. The best sales development reps have that balance in some of the different stages. Let me see if I can give you an example here. So this is a calculator that it's pretty basic, you guys, but it's a calculator I've often used to help organizations think about what they should have in their relational outbound prospecting pipeline. So I'll go through an exercise and say, okay, let's talk about inputs there on the left-hand side. You got a quota, $1 million. Great. What's your average deal size? 40K. Great. Walk me through some of your basic metrics: prospect to conversion, prospect to conversation to op, and then close rate. I use those inputs to then build some outputs. Okay, if that's what you want to hit, and those are some of your metrics, you're probably going to need to be doing about 58 contact accounts. And again, depending on the number of buyers in your buyer group, that's 3 to 5 contacts per account. In this example, it was 175 contacts should be actively in your pipeline. And you probably need to be doing about 80 activities a day based on your numbers. Again, it's just simple math here, you guys, nothing fancy. Okay, well, if I have 175 contacts that I'm actively working, how should they be broken down in my pipeline? Again, I'm looking at a balance option here. Should I have all of them in the new category? Well, that's where we find most of them. And that's not ideal, right? That's probably where you want to be. You want to see some sort of balance between the different stages in the pipeline so that you've got both that velocity and balance working. This is a real example from a client, and they were trying to manage to keep this nice movement. And I'm telling you, when you watch this, and nobody does, because they think of their sales development reps as lesser people or something. We do this all the time in account executives, but we can't get there for some reason for sales development reps. But it's an absolute best practice. A little more complicated, but if you're serious, I think you'll see some real advantages to it. So, okay. Oh my goodness, I wasn't even looking at some of these questions coming in, you guys. I was just on an absolute roll here. See. You know what? I'll get to some of these in just a minute because we're getting close to wrapping up, and then we'll do a little bit of a Q&A. Apologize, I got on my soapbox there and forgot to watch the Q&A box. So here's some best practice reports by function. I can barely see this. Let me see if I can make mine a little bit bigger. We're obviously talking today mostly about our sales development reps, but we've put in some other concepts here. So when we think about best practice reports, you guys, we break them down into a couple different categories. I'm trying to make my screen here a little bit bigger. I think I've got it. There we go. So you got your productivity, your proficiency, your performance, and I love this other category. It's like we couldn't think of another piece, so we just dumped whatever we couldn't think of into the other category. But this will be available to you. These are great starting conversations as you think about what reports you want to be managing in your sales development or in your prospecting pipeline. You don't have to use all of them. Again, that's not the idea, but we want to get you thinking. And I like these categories. Now, on the right-hand side, you're going to see some contact reports because we love that contact or that conversation. And so doubling down or diving into that and trying to get a little more robust about conversation or contact rates is fun. And then you got some inbound reports. So if you're taking inbound phone calls, a couple things you might want to consider there. But let me just highlight a couple on the sales development side of things. So we talked about that mapping and profiling, and that falls into the new contacts added or new. So the mapping and profiling, new contacts added or profiled. So those are some fun ones. And then you'll see some of the basic things around activities. When you jump into the proficiency, again, those are a little more of your rates, and those can get fun, especially those bottom ones. I just want to highlight a couple of them. That percentage of quota attained, and then also that percentage of pace. I really like that one because it can just kind of keep you on the map as to where you are and where you need to go. Because a lot of people will just kind of say, hey, it's the end of the month and we didn't hit our goals. Well, that's a problem. How do we fix that? Well, it's better if you know that every day of the month, and that percentage of pace knows exactly, oh my goodness, we're on target to hit what we need to hit, and then or you're basically not. The outcome metrics, the performance ones probably make sense, and then some of these other are dispositional reporting that we talked about before, as far as just getting into a lot of the why or why nots. Okay, so guys, I put in a couple questions. I'm going to answer a couple of these questions that have come in, but we've kind of hit our time here. So this is a big question. Should we measure appointments or should we measure opportunities? Again, my answer is I think you should be doing both. But I do feel like if you're more transactional, you're going to be focused on things more on the top of the pipeline. If you're more relational, you're going to be measuring and focusing things more on the bottom of the pipeline. So it's something to consider. But again, I'm a believer that you probably want to think about doing both. A lot of people asking, will they have access to some of these best practice reports? We've got people saying, I've got a couple of questions on compensation in here. For those, so we got Tim and John both asked questions on compensation. Guys, hit me up later on that because it's a little bit into reporting, but I do think it's a different conversation. Again, it falls into that idea of transactional versus relational as to what you should be comping on. But I'd use some of these best practice reports as samples to just start thinking about it. And then again, next week we'll dive in to very specifics on how you build them, etc. So Wow. Okay. Well, everybody, really appreciate your time. Was fun to be on today. Um, you'll see on the right hand side a little bit of a survey that says, hey, how did you like this webinar? And then what topics would you like to discuss? And we'd love to hear that from you. If you can take just a minute, type in a couple answers there. Get me on LinkedIn, message me. We want to make sure that we talk to you about what you want to hear. So thanks everybody for joining. Looking forward to our next webinar next week, and have a great day.